It may not look like it, but these are the most important few seconds of the South of Midnight trailer.
For South of Midnight, our third-person action-adventure game, the story and characters bring a folkloric Deep South to life.
The folklore and myths of the Deep South haven't been explored much in video games, so I'm here to highlight as many of the monsters and creepy creatures from South of Midnight as I can. I'll also share the backstories and myths that inspired them, and I've got some help as we've just had a big chat with Whitney and Zaire on just this very topic. So we've got some official explanations as well as a heavy dose of speculation and deduction on my part based on what we've seen so far. So let's not harpy on with any introductions, let's get into it.
You know anything about that creepy old house up on the hill?
Let's start with a character the most recent trailer drew special focus towards, Huggin Molly.
Wait, is Huggin Molly real?
In the game, Huggin Molly appears to manifest as a giant insectoid puppeteer, almost looking like a wooden puppet herself. In the original mythology, however, she functions as a malicious spirit, a story to scare children into not staying out too late, who, instead of being relegated to just one house as she seems to be here, roams the streets of Abersville looking for victims.
So this is Huggin Molly, and she's based on the myth of Huggin Molly, and the myth of Huggin Molly is a woman who steals children in the night, and I think people will say things like, oh, Huggin Molly will get you, like, you know, sort of something to spook children.
One thing the game sticks to well is her size. In the original myth, she is 7 feet tall, but here we see she is even bigger.
She's visually inspired by a giant spider, which works for the context of, you know, where she lives, and also spiders have this very sort of maternal association with spiders that we liked, like Charlotte's Web. So there's a maternal element to Huggin Molly.
And that maternal vibe fits in well with the original myth, where she would wrap her arms around you in an embrace. And I mean, sure, she then screams in your ear, but you can't win them all. And this is a good time to stop and ask you to subscribe to the channel, because if you don't, Huggin Molly will get you. Back to the video. Next up is the big bad gator featured heavily in the gameplay showcase from a few months ago, Two-Toed Tom.
That's Two-Toed Tom. Big gator. I gotta drop you off fast.
In the original legends, he was a gigantic beast who would bother fishermen and the like, and the origin of the name is up for debate, the most common explanation being a story where a trapper finds a trap with a gargantuan gator's foot in it, so big it couldn't even take off the whole thing, leaving him with only 2 toes. The developers here seem to have really focused in on his size and age.
But he haunts this specific part of the game after a flood, usually. So a flood will come and then he'll show up because there's water for him to navigate. And he's very old. You can see that he's got spears stuck to him. People have been trying to get rid of him for ages, and they can't really.
We see him as a beast almost falling apart, beset upon, and truly enormous. And if you know anything about megafauna, you know they need to just eat and eat and eat.
He's just very, very hungry. That's his weakness, is that he's insatiable, and yeah, he's just very hungry.
And from giant monsters to the littlest of guys, we've been very curious about some of the more traditional fauna and animals in some of these trailers. For instance, these scheming rabbits. And the devs actually had some insight into what role the normal creatures of the game will play.
The little small flora and fauna you see in the game, like sometimes they will lead you down a side path or towards your goal. Hazel will sometimes, she's in the game by herself a lot. She might just have like lines talking to the creatures like, where am I supposed to go? Do you know a little guy? Like that type of stuff. So it's really cool because the art team kind of made bespoke models for the creatures. So you see like rabbits, you see little muskrats, bears, deer, snapping turtles, and parts of the game you have another little guy named Cruton. He's like a little puppet, and he goes into burrows, and there's little like tables and like animal-sized chairs in there. So it just kind of adds another layer of mythology and kind of a little bit of extra magic. It's not like super explained, but it's just something that's just kind of fun for the audience to see, like, oh, like what is a fox doing in a burrow with like tiny animal candles? Like what's going on down there, you guys? What secrets are you hiding? And it's just kind of fun. And the art team just did a really good job making these models. I think they're very cute in the stylized way that all of Midnight is.
And speaking of Cruton, this little doll shows up in multiple places in what we've seen of the game so far, and we were curious as to what role he played. I was scratching my head on what myth and legend he could be connected to, as whilst dolls are a common feature of a lot of folklore, his design was so specific, I felt like there had to be more there.
Yeah, this is Cruton. So Hazel wanted a doll, and she got this, which is like a family heirloom that's passed down. He's like her childhood doll. You ask for a Barbie, and you get Cruton sometimes in life. So, and he's kind of a weird little guy. He does get imbued with magic as well later in the game, and he aids Hazel on her journey, so she can kind of summon him. He turns small, kind of like Ant-Man, so he'll shrink and he'll be on her belt loop, and then she'll summon him and he'll go run into burrows and do little tasks for her because Hazel's too big to fit into a rabbit hole. She also can throw him at haints, and he will possess them and make them fight other haints, which I just think is really fun to watch.
So he's a little guy who gets even littler, but as a little behind the scenes tidbit, it turns out he wasn't always going to be that way.
Originally, Cruton was going to be a bit bigger, but then I think in a prototype, someone made him a potato because it worked. It needed to be like a fast prototype, and the potato shape really stuck. Everyone was really like attached to this potato-shaped character, so we ended up making him kind of this squat little guy, and he's supposed to feel like an old sort of folktale doll made of scraps and buttons and different types of fabric. It was that balance of making him kind of cute and endearing and folksy.
Weavers fix things deep down. They mend parts of your soul so ripped you'd forgotten they were ever one piece.
Now, one character I was instantly fascinated by was this big bird-like creature, which I initially thought was some kind of thunderbird from Native American mythology, but on their social media they revealed he's a Rougarou, which is normally a Southern American version of a werewolf, but here, as you may have noticed, he's not got that much wolf going on. So what is going on here?
A Rougarou is traditionally a southern version of a werewolf, and early on, there were a few decisions led to keeping the idea of a shape-shifting character, but instead of doing the werewolf, having the shape-shifting character become a giant owl. And that reason is like TBD, in the narrative. So you get to learn more about him later on and who he was and why he became a Rougarou.
Ooh, so a real mystery, one I can't wait to unravel in the full game, but I wanted to know more about his design, with his wings looking almost like a tapestry.
He was one of the first creatures we designed, and the concept artist working on him did a really amazing job interpreting the crafted direction into his design, so really pushing these textiles in his wings and giving him this sort of burlap woven quality in the materials. His feathers were pushed really far in terms of having this textile quality to them.
The last thing based on real-world folklore we were interested in hearing more about the role of in the game was the bottle trees. These are a real thing, and whilst they're a big part of Southern culture, you can actually find these all over the world to some extent, the original superstition dating back to a 3,000-year-old Arabian tale about bottle imps who returned to the earth through trees. This story made its way across the world over time, and eventually to the US, to what we see today, where bottle trees are believed to keep bad spirits away.
Those are bottle trees, and they're originated in West Africa with like hoodoo tradition. But they trap spirits, they keep evil spirits away. Sometimes people will paint the underside of their porch a color called haint blue.
But what role do they play in the game?
And this is part of Hazel's weaver's kit. It's one of her tools. So as she's passing through the world, she gets a hold of a bottle and she gathers up the fragments of these memories, and she will take that bottle on a bottle run. So she kind of goes basically like into the grand tapestry, and she will go to basically a magical bottle tree that will give her more of the full story, so she can understand the person's trauma better, the creature's trauma better. But that is an actual Southern tradition. People do have bottle trees in their yards. You see them when you go around. When we did reference trips, I'm sure people saw them down there as well.
There are a few other things in the game that I think are worth mentioning. The giant catfish who appears to be your partner throughout the game is a reference to a common urban legend about catfish across this area of the US, with even Mark Twain having written about seeing one in the Mississippi River.
Yeah, so Catfish is voiced by a man named Walter. He's a great guy. He's 70 years old, plays fiddle. Really cool. He was really excited about the project. I think this is one of his first voice acting jobs, if I remember correctly. Having someone who grew up in that setting was really helpful in giving the realism that we were looking for. This being part of their lived experience, I think, again, does lend the game that air of authenticity that I think elevates the story and the setting.
A talking fish. Nope. Ain't no way.
Old Weaver like you must have seen stranger things than me. And I was so sorry to hear about your misfortunation. You find your mama yet?
How do you know about my mama?
But it's not just beasts from real-world cryptozoology that'll make appearances in this game. There are some interesting original characters too. The first we saw all the way back in the announcement of South of Midnight.
Death don't have no mercy in this land.
Shakin Bones.
Yeah, this is Shakin Bones, and you're gonna find him in the game in the swamp. He's kind of a mysterious figure. There's not much known about him, but he's kind of like a Charon type character, River Styx. He ushers people back and forth to various places, but he plays a part in the story of an earlier Reaver that you will again meet in the game. He's also just kind of across time doing this thing. He's been alive for a really, really long time. He's just kind of a larger than life, inspired by old blues musicians. But yeah, that's Shakin Bones. I think he's also a pretty cool guy.
So it's our very own Grim Reaper. But that's not all. We see a couple of trees in the trailers that appear to have people in them. This one we see for a moment, but then also this one, and as it turns out, this is one of the original creature concepts for the game.
Benjy is one of our original folk creatures, and you find out more about him through experiencing this region and listening to the music and experiencing the story of this biome. Benjy he's massive, and he's both a creature and a level at the same time. So there was a lot of cross collaboration between art and level design, and you have to climb him. He's gentle. Our creatures are not all angry. He was a boy, so even calling him a creature is a bit not nice for him. But yeah, he's massive. Like from an art, game design, production standpoint, it just took a lot of really intense cross collaboration between departments to build him. You have to prototype it and test it, and he's a level in and of himself. So Benjy was a big challenge, but in the end we're pretty proud of him. Benjy was one of our earliest ideas for a creature, and he started as almost as an exploration of what does a southern folkloric character look and feel like. There was a very early concept of Benjy, and just having this man trapped in a giant peach tree. He does have a really meaningful story, but I think that initially we were really trying to get a feeling for what could feel like visually like a really southern folkloric entity that you could run across. And so I think that's where we wanted to be able to have that flexibility to not necessarily have everything tied to one specific real folkloric creature, but in his story there's still references to Southern Gothic tales, and there's still a lot of symbolism in him that's Southern.
And from what I can tell, this is all just scratching the surface of the characters and creatures we'll see in the game. I can't wait to see what other pieces of American mythology they'll take from, and when asked about what sorts of places we could see drawn from, the devs gave an interesting answer.
The interesting thing about folktales is I think there's similar things in many cultures. Like werewolves exist in cultures. Women that snatch children exist in other cultures, like La Llorona in I think Mexican culture. I think humans throughout time just kind of settle on these. They're almost like Huggin Molly is like a warning, like eat your vegetables or Huggin Molly gets you. Don't go out at night. It's ultimately to keep you safe type thing. Like I'm scaring you because I love you. Like that kind of thing. And I think it's just kind of a testament to how we're all a little bit connected in that kind of way. We have these little readables with these creatures we just call burrowers. You never see them, but they live in the burrows that Cruton goes into. And one of the things that we did was if you put iron stakes outside your garden or something, they'll leave you alone. And repelling magic with iron is something with the Fae in Irish cultures or other cultures. So yeah, I think we kind of pulled from other things, but our folklore specifically was to do with the southern region of the United States. No particular state. South of Midnight takes place in like quote unquote the South. It's not like a particular place, but we tried to respect all those different folktales and handle them in a pretty respectful way.
And with that, I've been Josh, this is FGS, and I can't wait to play South of Midnight when it releases on April 8th, 2025. Bye bye for now.